At no point does anybody say, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. There's a basic horror to it, but then at an intellectual level, you can't help but be slightly fascinated by these people. What is wrong with them that they're so in the grip of an ideology that they're doing these mistreatments and never questioning that perhaps they shouldn't be doing them at all?
Appalling on the professional side. That's the American Psychological Association, that's the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, and it's certainly WPath. Inexcusable. I've never seen anything like this. I'm absolutely appalled and ashamed of my therapist colleagues, for example, of not being rioting in the streets because of this. That brings us to the next issue. Gender distress. Well, what the hell is the difference between gender distress and anxiety and depression? And the answer is mostly nothing. Mostly nothing. And so maybe there's something left over that's specific to something like body dysmorphia, but probably not. You might say, well, people with gender dysphoria are more likely to commit suicide. It's like, no, depressed and anxious people are more likely to commit suicide. You have to demonstrate that there's an additional utility in your diagnostic label. There's no difference between confusion about gender and confusion about identity. Those are the same thing. And everybody who seeks psychological treatment has confusion about identity. That's why they seek treatment. There's no reason whatsoever that any psychologist or physician who's been trained remotely in the mental health sciences should ever fall for that, even for a second, no matter what. But they did. So now we have gender distress by a pack of professionals who aren't professional and who aren't a pack and are certainly not a professional association. And what do they recommend? They don't recommend the minimal necessary intervention. The clinical literature 6 years ago was absolutely clear. Leave them the hell alone.
Right.
Till they're 18.
Yeah.
Most of them turn out to be gay. And 90% of them, and the existence of that final 10% is highly debatable, accept the physical reality of their embodiment. The rule is just wait. Bad treatment is worse than no treatment, okay? But no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do the opposite. We're going to take the most extreme possible, imaginable surgical intervention. And then we're going to combine that with the most extreme possible imaginable hormonal intervention. And then we're going to recommend that, and we're going to tell people that if they don't listen, their children are going to die, right? They're going to commit suicide, which is a complete bloody lie. There was never a bit of evidence for that, not even bad evidence. It was just a lie. And then, to top it all off, we're going to offer this absolutely cataclysmic treatment with unimaginably dire consequences to people who don't even understand and can't understand what they're agreeing to. Then we're going to promise them that's how they'll find their true self. So that's where we're at. It's so sickening. It's so sickening. Like, I knew this was coming back in 2016. I could see it just absolutely clearly. I knew it was going to affect young women primarily because that's the historical part for the course. But you said even you were enticed into, what did you think of what's Abigail? Okay, why?
I think because if you accept that this mistreatment is widespread, it is so damning. It is such an indictment. It's an indictment of the entire, what they call the chain of trust, from the pseudoscientists to the practitioners to the associations to the news media, psychologists, psychiatrists, the institutions,
surgeons.
every
Pharmaceutical
institution,
companies.
Yeah, the indictment is so serious, and it really goes to just the rotting away of the core restraints the society used to impose, the gatekeeping. And I want to clarify one thing, by the way, which is that in the files, they don't talk about gender distress. They just think they're all trans. If you are someone that expresses confusion about your gender identity, the assumption is that you are trans. And it clearly comes right out of the gay rights movement. And this is, I think, what's been so hard of a lot of it for how liberals accepted it, was that I think a lot of us accepted gay relationships and same-sex relationships and the innateness of them. And so when it came to trans, it was just the application of this rule of innateness onto trans. There was never a question that there was a misdiagnosis and a mistreatment. And when it just runs away and it's like everybody's talking about, this is the new form of liberation. And then you had, as you were saying, there's different characters, right? There's the psychopaths and the narcissists who are mesmerizing people. The psychopaths are bullying people. All of the nice guys, all of the kind liberals, the compassionate, caring liberals cave in. And they kind of go, I can't deal with it. It is just an absolutely shocking cowardice, dogma, psychopathologies. This all has to be stopped. I will say, 1 week after we released the WPath Files, Britain's National Health Service came out and finally banned puberty blockers in all of its clinics. The Times of London then came out the next day. This is a center-left newspaper. They called this quack medicine in the lead editorial. They called for expanding the ban. They are worried, as we should be, that puberty blockers are still going to be prescribed in private clinics. But you could see with the WPath Files, the NHS decision, huge opening where finally people that had, I think, including me, that had been sort of quiet on this, maybe a little bit like unsure, is this my role to speak out on this? Finally going, no, this is absolutely bonkers and has to be stopped. This is maybe the greatest medical mistreatment scandal of the last 100 years, 200 years.
It's hard to identify a worse one because the nitty-gritty of the details of this are so shocking that you can't believe it's true.
The picture is, oh yeah, we're doing all the science. In these conversations, the doctors will say, well, I don't know. I mean, we haven't seen anybody really come in to complain with us. There's not only is there no serious study or follow-up of the victims of these mistreatments, they're not interested. Nobody even chimed in and said, hey, maybe we should follow up with these people. What about the person that had tumors on their liver? Maybe we should find that person. We did not see this anywhere in the files. It was a complete abdication of responsibility. It's just this kind of mania. We're going to mess with people's bodies, and then we don't care what happens afterwards. It's almost like they're getting a hedonic pleasure from it, and then they're done with it.
We haven't even talked about one of the absolute bloody horrors of this, which is the fact that it's unbelievably profitable. I saw a projection. This was 3 years ago. Some idiot consultant company came up with a 130-page PDF showing the trans industry as its growth projections for the next 7 years. Right? In this marketing speak, it's well, it's going to go from a few $100 million to something approximating 1.3 billion in the next 7. Get in while the getting's good. And every bloody butcher that can't make a living as a genuine physician and surgeon can easily turn their attention to producing pseudo penises out of cut off flesh. It's so sickening. You investigated the Twitter files, for example. You've already seen this happen, but you said that even in your case, what do you think it was that made you initially resistant to believing that this might be the case?
I still had some confidence in the medical system before really getting into this. And I think that was part of what was a barrier. I mean, I read Abigail Schreier's book twice. I spoke to her on the phone multiple times. I think she grew a little frustrated with me. There was a sense among some gender critical folks of where are the men? It's disproportionately women that have been raising the alarm about this. But there's that sense of look, if this is really what it appears to be, and now we have the evidence overwhelming that it is. In the WPath Files, you have everything you need to know that this is just as awful as it appears to be. If that's true, then you cannot trust the American Medical Association, the Endocrine Society. You cannot trust the health insurance companies. You cannot trust the hospitals. You cannot trust the doctors. It means that the fancy word for this, of course, is iatrogenesis. That's when the medical system makes people sick. A wonderful book about it.
Fourth leading cause of death. Cause of death. And that was before. That was when it was funcking. We have no idea what its contribution to death is now.
Such a grotesque perversion of the promise of healthcare. And a perversion, as you were saying before, of the lesbian, gay rights, and bisexual movement. They're literally destroying the bodies of people that, if you left them alone, most of them would grow up to be gay, lesbian, and bisexual. So you should see the gay rights movement be the first out there to express outrage. But of course, they were the first to get co-opted by it. The corruption of it. It starts with the people that would have been the first line of defense. If you had said, there's going to be an effort to completely undermine the reproductive capacity and sexual function of gay, lesbian, and bisexual adolescents, you would have said, well, no, the lesbian, gay, bisexual movement would never allow that. No, they're part of it. It is the LGBT movement. They facilitated it.
Yeah.
So it's
let's zero in on that.